every one of them will say, we have recycled 98% of our waste. No, you haven't.
Learned while researching about you was helical economy.
Right. It's the most bonkers thing in the world. Medicine and healthcare are notorious for throwing away actually perfectly good stuff. The reality is councils around the UK are a massive problem. I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. It's actually stronger because we left the mouldy milk in it. It's the fact that in my mind, I'm seeing yet another slow motion car crash happening. It is a long story.
Through my work at GoDivers, I get to meet some of the most fantastic business minds and I get to have some really insightful conversations with them. Many a times I would wonder if I could share these insights with the world out there, and here is my attempt to do that. My name is Vishal and welcome to the Dig Deep podcast. We discuss business, entrepreneurship, and thoughts of value from some of the industry leading experts. In our first episode today, I'm with someone who's an expert in the field of recycling. He's a trailblazer in turning waste into products, championing circular economy and sustainable innovation. His work is reshaping how we think about waste and resource efficiency. Please welcome Ethar Alali, founder and CEO of ReallyRecycle. Let's dive into the conversation now. You know how sustainability is one of those things where if not enough people care about it, we might not really have a world to live in, right?
Yeah.
And your work majorly is a lot in sustainability, recycling, circular economy, and all of that. Would you want to tell us what you're doing with all the work that you're doing, whether be it Automedi or ReallyRecycle?
Yeah. And it is a long story. And as you say, sustainability is really, really kind of all-encompassing. It's like an all or nothing thing, really. So what we at ReallyRecycle understood is that it's a big, big problem. It's not just about like waste or solar or EVs or whatever.
Yeah.
It's about literally almost everything about the way we exist in our society today. That's what sustainability is about. We're talking about lowering poverty. We're talking about creating basic equity between people in different parts of the world for their healthcare. But the question is, where do you actually start with all this? Because it's such a big problem and you're at risk of boiling the ocean. So we thought, well, what is the sort of smallest thing that we can do that helps us turn some of these economies kind of 90 degrees? How do we make it better for people and planet? Yeah. So what we decided to do at ReallyRecycle was we decided to tackle the problem of unrecyclable plastic waste. And the reason why is because typically that's the stuff that contaminates the oceans. It's the stuff that contaminates even waste streams. But often people don't know what to do with it. So what councils and businesses do is they try to split it out into things they can recycle and things they can't recycle, but never really make it clear what is the recyclable bit and what's the unrecyclable bit. So in some cases, you'll get places which can recycle the bottle tops of drinks bottles and stuff like that, when other parts of the UK might not be able to do that. And other parts of the world will have different rules in their own right. There's just no consistency. But every time you try to solve one of those problems, you find a different thing that causes an issue. So, for example, solving plastic film, right? Another big issue with that is that you might get packaging like sandwich packs that combine film and cardboard. So how should you recycle that? Is it cardboard or is it plastic? So this creates loads of little problems because they give people almost too much choice in terms of what bins to put it in. So we thought, well, listen, you know what? We're going to take all this stuff and just deal with it ourselves. So what we decided to do is have one bin.
Yeah.
No more, no less. In that one bin, people put their cardboard, their plastics. We'll take it, we'll recycle it. But not just recycle it. We know that even downstream recycling can't take all this other stuff necessarily. Manufacturers can't use all the types of plastic. So what we do is we decide to manufacture it ourselves. So we take like waste, whatever it is, right? We'll so often grind it down, create a filament out of it, and use those bits of filament, those coils of filament, if you like, to 3D print products. And that's what's different because manufacturing is subject to injection molding in manufacturing is often subject to really tight tolerances and are really sensitive to contamination. So we thought we'd solve that problem by ensuring that we built a system that was a lot less sensitive to waste contamination, whether that's through other plastics or even things like food. And the thing that we settled on was actually 3D printing because we could tune every part of that, so much so that we can even now use some of the contamination as an additive to make the plastics that we get stronger, right? Which is absolutely off the wall. Because when we show people what we regard as a kind of almost cheese-based plastic, it's not really. It's actually milk bottles that have got all the milk that's gone a bit off, right?
Yeah.
We'll grind it, process it into a filament, and people were gobsmacked about the fact that it's actually stronger because we left the moldy milk in it. Right, and it's the most bonkers thing in the world. But we've done this through a kind of a lot of trial and error, but also not experimentation and mathematical theory, if you like, to understand how these materials actually behave. Because when you create it for 3D printing, you have a number of different things that make things easier for you, and there's a whole load of science behind it. Basically, what it means is that we can, at the right kind of temperatures and pressures and extrusions, you can mix a number of different plastics together and some additives together to actually make it stronger overall than you would get out of those individual items, the plastics by themselves. And it shouldn't be too much of a surprise because things like fiberglass are often added to plastics, or carbon fiber added to plastics to make them stronger. So we're just doing something very similar, just trying to use natural things as well. See what I mean? So it's a very different sort of approach.
That's fantastic. I mean, one of the major aims of this podcast as well is for somebody who doesn't really come from this area and who doesn't have domain expertise, doesn't know much, should be able to get value, learn about all of this. There's a few things that I was aware of. Yeah, linear economy.
Yep.
Yeah, where you extract, use, and dispose.
That's it.
Yeah. Second was the circular, where reuse, recycle. We keep the resources in a closed loop.
Yep. Ideally, yeah.
Yeah. Ideally, yes. Now, the third thing that I actually learned while researching about you was helical economy.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Would you be able to tell us a little about that?
Totally. So you really nicely summarized what the difference between the circular and the linear economies are. And ideally, circular economy should be closed loop because that reduces the most amount of emissions. But what it is often naive to is the fact that a lot of the, I'll call it, transportation is still maintained in conventional circular economies. So if you've got a product that you buy from and it's manufactured thousands of miles away, you'll ship it to the UK, you might use it once, and then you'll throw it away. And that might even get exported somewhere else, right? Possibly even thousands more miles. And almost half the emissions that are embodied in individual products come from transportation, right? So actually, if you can reduce transportation, all the better. But the other factor is that not everything comes from the same thousands of miles away. There are lots of different parts of the world that we get stuff from. So one example which we use a lot is medical plastics. By the nature of how medical plastic products are certified, they have to almost always come from Europe, right? Because that's the only place you can get compliant medical products, whether that's the packaging or the devices themselves. And when the plastic is recycled, the remanufactured standards are so difficult that you may as well just use virgin plastic anyway. So, medicine and healthcare are notorious for throwing away actually perfectly good stuff because there is this precautionary principle. You have to keep the patient safe, and it's not an unreasonable thing to do. But this doesn't mean that the level of waste is extremely high. Now, in a normal circular economy, because you can't turn it into the same medical device again or medical packaging again, you have to throw it away, right? But this stuff actually still has value. When you recycle a medicine pot in the UK, for example, even if you recycle it twice, it's still higher quality than the plastic that you get to make things like coat hooks or whatever else. So our approach was, why are you throwing this stuff away? Let's use it for a different sector for two main reasons. First of all, even when you recycle it twice, you get a better quality of plastic and a stronger product than if you used virgin plastic from thousands of miles away, and it only came from Europe. That's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, you're now not sending it anywhere, right? We're now reusing that plastic in other sectors. So a helical economy understands that actually the most sustainable approach might not be a pure circular economy. We have to choose to be able to go into adjacent economies or even economies or sectors elsewhere. And what this allows us to do is to move one step away from, say, healthcare each time. And that's what the helical economy does. It does a circle, but if it can't go back into the same cycle, it goes into the next adjacent sector. So healthcare into laboratories or healthcare into hospital maintenance. See what I mean? So that then gives us the opportunity to reduce emissions and also increase the quality of the plastics of those products at exactly the same time. So it's not automatic that circular economies will always generate the most sustainable outcome. If you really want to reduce emissions, you have to think beyond the circle in that third dimension, if you like.
You talk a lot about, local circularity.
Yep.
That's what I researched around, like in your company and all of that. I mean, you guys do talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
Can you tell what is actually local circularity?
Yeah, exactly. So, or what we call circular microeconomies, absolutely. Again, so in the case of Stockport, for example, we have a mill, or we're part of the mill, and in that mill, we process all the waste for the tenants and indeed the local economy elsewhere. So we capture it, we process it, and then make product off the back of that, and that goes to the same people that gave us the waste in the first place, right? So that removes all the transportation, or at least all the long-distance transportation, and we do everything in the first and final mile as a result. And this has several huge benefits. First of all, we don't have to run a single really large factory and a single really large material recovery facility because it's now decentralized. Also, the spaces are small, so you don't have to heat a bigger space than we do in each case. Also, by doing it that way, you remove almost all the freight and logistics of transporting this stuff around, apart from the bits in the last mile, which are usually the shortest and most environmentally friendly. So much so that we can even take advantage of these localized clusters, each one that does all three bits, by ensuring that we can capture waste locally, send it to that particular cluster hub, and then go on to the next area, pick up some more waste, send it to the next cluster hub in the sequence. What we're doing is taking waste, manufacturing and supply, and trying to create web-scale stuff out of that. Right? That means localized, smaller, circular microeconomies that work together as virtual factories, as virtual material recovery facilities. And if one happens to go down, doesn't matter. There's maybe 30 more in a city that will help you do it. You know what I mean? So that ensures that you never have a blockage anywhere. You can deal with plastics in ways that you couldn't do at scale. You don't get situations where extremely long conveyor belts get tangled up with soft plastic and bin bags in those processes, because to us it doesn't matter. That stuff can be dealt with even manually if we had to, but although we of course have automated processes to deal with. So by doing it that way, you reduce energy requirements, you massively reduce emissions, and you create localized economies that even can employ local people to deal with the waste in a way that makes it much more productive for them, because the amount of value you get out of something as a product is much more than you get much more than you get from the plastic as waste. See what I mean? So if for example, you take a ton of waste and you can only ever make 300 pounds from it, that's wasteful. You've got to do a lot of stuff, which is why these material recoveries are so large. But if you can suddenly turn a ton of waste into 76,000 pounds worth of value, then actually you can take the waste for free, right? And that's really what we're trying to create, is nurturing these economies locally that use that waste plastic as a way to create jobs, employment, purpose, lowers poverty, and even opens up opportunities in parts of the world that can't currently get normal factories or normal waste recovery facilities. So you can see that the purpose of these small-scale circular microeconomies working in parallel as a decentralized and distributed sort of system is much wider and much more important than just waste. It's actually a whole economy in a box, basically.
If we're able to turn that trash into something that is that valuable, that, you know, like in just the conventional setting,
Yeah.
I would think that, okay, something is trash. Now we might be able to extract 20% more of it, 30% in value or something. However, if we're drastically actually getting an output which is much more than what that trash or even that product was, then, I mean, that changes the whole ballgame altogether.
Totally. And it changes the ballgame even in the conventional sense, because it's well known that in places like the UK, which have a fairly advanced waste recycling sector, if you like, typically you'll lose about 10% of the profit because of contamination, right? Just having us in the system acting between the normal, waste generators, i.e. the consumers or the businesses, and the waste recyclers, not only helps us make money out of the middle of it and helps communities by proxy, it also releases the 10% of contaminated plastics from the system, which allows the waste recyclers in the conventional sense to make 10% more themselves just by us being around. See what I mean? It's kind of what is called autopyrosis. It's the ability of other existing organisms or systems to benefit from the existence of what would normally be considered a competitor. Right, and this it's about changing the mindset, the paradigm altogether, for sure. Yeah.
I would just like to touch up on one of the things, around how we're able to extract a lot more value from the trash as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how there's a general assumption that recycling cannot be beneficial financially. Do you basically, is this true? Are there any monetary incentives to be doing this? Other
Yeah.
than, of course, I mean, it's a good thing to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't say
absolutely,
otherwise.
yeah, exactly. Well, to be fair, I mean, I don't know how many people in the world have kind of, well, let's just say there's a graveyard of good intentions around the world. You know what I mean? Lots of people want to do the right thing, but as you say, you can't live on thin air, right? At the end of the day, there has to be an incentive there for businesses to change, but also a monetary reward for people to doing the right thing. And the short answer is yes, there absolutely is. The problem is you cannot ever do it with the current conventional linear economy or the first generation circular economies, because transportation will eat most of that, right? You'll get situations where the waste that you recycle can't be used elsewhere, right? So yes, you'll sell it maybe to a manufacturer. The manufacturer will try and use it and they'll throw 70% of that away again, right? So they're not getting the value that they paid for it. They made a loss, actually. So they're annoyed. You've then thrown this waste away a second time, which gets processed a second time, and it'll be sold maybe to a different manufacturer. Hopefully, they'll also say, no, can't use any of that. They'll throw most of all of that away. So you can see that the system is almost geared to making losses all the time, which is ridiculous, right? And what they end up doing, they end up burning it anyway, or trying to export it elsewhere, basically by trying to capture the carbon credits of another country, and then giving them our waste in return, which is a bit of a carbon tax avoidance thing, I have to say. But, you know, we are where we are. But that's the first generation economy. None of it works, right? None of it works as it is intended to work. So what can you do to actually generate value from it? Well, the first thing is to acknowledge that when you try to recycle plastics, you're recycling them into another supply chain, right? And what are called vendors take that plastic and then try to sell it to the manufacturers. And what you're hoping for is that someone will then buy it and be able to use it. But in reality, almost none of it is used in reality. It all gets destroyed as part of incineration. Or at least half of it does. And then we might export a larger percentage of the other half and hope for the best, but it doesn't happen. So what we acknowledged was that all these different economic increments add to the price that someone ultimately pays for the end product, but doesn't consolidate it in any one operator. So we thought, well, if we're doing the whole closed loop ourselves, all of that extra economic value is now not being distributed amongst all these other actors. They're staying within our own walls, right? So that's how we're able to generate like $76,000 or even up to $100,000 of value from waste, but as the end product that people will actually buy. Better still, because we use 3D printing, there are certain things you can do with that technology that you simply cannot do with injection molding. For example, you can't create a product that comes off the bed ready to be used at all. You can't remove plastics from an inner part of a design, because when you injection mold, you have to fill the mold, right? While you can remove it from 3D printing. So that means you get a lot more out of a ton of plastics doing 3D printing than you would do from injection molding. So by combining those together, you get a really massive uptick in the amount of value you get out of those plastics, because you're selling the end product at the end of the day. Whether you sell it to the wholesale market or direct to consumer, you're keeping all that economic value yourself. And that means in our case, when each cluster becomes self-sustaining, we can almost take waste for free, right? And even while we're in that journey, we're able to make money on both sides, because we're being paid to take the waste and we're getting paid to provide goods and products. And because it's often more expensive to do it that way conventionally, but it means that we're able to subsidize one side or the other, because we can use some of the waste cash that we get paid to take the waste or collect the waste from. So that money that we get paid from the clients to take away the waste subsidizes the cost of producing the product, and vice versa. And eventually, when the cost of producing the product is outweighed by the value we get from that product, we can then start thinking about taking waste for free. And that radically changes the way that economy can work. Because not only can you start taking away waste for free, which would normally cost £300, but when you're making £100,000 out of it, it doesn't really matter. You can take that away for free, and you can even pay people to bring the waste to you, right? So one of the things we're launching soon is our forward and reverse vending system, right? So it's a dual-use vending machine that basically captures waste on one end, and you can identify the type of plastic by scanning the barcode of the product. and it allows you to get a product that you might have bought online or even from the system right in front of you as well. So that means that same machine provides the product and takes it back, right? And takes any other plastic bag. And eventually, once that's bedded into most areas and there's enough revenue coming from the purchase of the products, that machine will be instructed to pay you to bring plastic to it as a consumer, right? So now not only are you having to deal with which bin you have to throw away with your council because they don't know, right? You can recycle the stuff it can't normally take, and you get paid to do it. There's a monetary incentive to do it. But that, of course, depends on whether each individual district will act in the best interest of the planet, and we're hoping that this carrot will give them an opportunity to do that.
Wonderful, and it's a win-win. There is an incentive to literally take this trash and deposit that as well.
Right, absolutely. Exactly right.
Wonderful.
Exactly right.
So, one thing I believe in is a lot of what we do in our life is about the experiences that we've had, while growing up and all of that. So, in your journey towards, all of this, sustainability, recycling and all of that, what do you really think, maybe as a kid or during your childhood, what are those experiences that really led you to this?
Man, there's a story and a half there. Listen, I'm going to be that old guy at the bar, man, telling war stories till the end of my days, I'm telling you. Right, so, but I mean, in fairness, it's a really good question, because I think if I have to look back at my life and say, okay, which bits are the things that influenced me today? It's a really weird one, because you wouldn't assume that my life would be one of the ones that would have ended up in a sustainability position. But that said, there were little pockets of inspiration. Because I remember times when I was about 10 years old, I was doing bird watching. I was also a programmer, even back then. So 9 years old, I started to program my BBC Master Compact once, right? And one of the programs I'd helped input into this system, but I didn't write it myself, this one, was a bird watching program. A bit boring. Bird watching, sit there, you kind of, with your binoculars and try to look out into the world and hope for the best and see if you can find the particular bird that everybody else has been looking for the last 3 weeks. And you'll mark it down. Great. But during that time, I was also a bit of a young activist. I was very interested in climate change. It was global warming at the time. I was worried about things like acid rain. And as a kid that kind of blended all these three things together, I was constantly complaining to my parents about it. But this is bad for the planet, which is fine. But then as you kind of grow up, I kind of started to try and engage with eco-activists at the world at the time. And honestly, some of them were absolutely awful. There was a kind of an almost eco-fascist vibe in the groups I funnily found myself in, which is a bit terrible. Because, you'd think that people who are eco-activists should be receptive to the needs of certain communities around the world. There'd be some of the people that you would hope would support ethnic minorities, but it just seemed that this particular group just wasn't interested. So I fell out of favor. I just thought, forget it, no way. So, of course, as you do, you kind of grew up with that. I kept with the programming, did all of that for years. Kind of worked I got my first job with the university, oddly enough, when I was 14 years old. But I was still at school, studying at the same time, doing my A-levels, ended up doing my degree. Whilst I was at university, I obviously had this job as a proper programmer. So I did my junior years whilst I was there. And then I went into the world of work, as you do. And you think to yourself, this hobby that I'd had for, by this point, sort of 13 years or so. And I worked as a proper programmer, and I went into the world of work post-graduation. I thought to myself, okay, well, this is actually worse than I thought it would ever be as far as the workplace is concerned. I don't want to. Because you think, and this is always what they tell you, never try and turn your hobby into your job, because you'll become disillusioned with it over time. Trust me, it didn't require that much time. But I still stayed at it. I excelled really quickly in that space. I mean, there were times where I thought, well, I might be an architect maybe by the time I'm 35 years old. But no, they'd given me responsibility for £400 million systems when I was 23 years old in the city of London. And that meant that, okay, well, I've achieved that now. What do I do with myself? Right? So by the time I was 25 years old, I started contracting. And then I did that for a decade and a half. But at the same time, I started to look at all these different organizations that I joined. I'd become a trustee in a couple of charities as well. Did that for many, many years in parallel with the day job. And I think a lot of that has been fed or influenced by these historical things that I've had, kind of engaged with or experience that I've had. And a lot of them naturally would do, because a lot of people deliver who they are today, but on the platform of who they were as a child, even, or yesterday. So it's not a bad question at all, because it kind of does make you wonder where those influences have come from. And I think that it's there's always going to be a mishmash, but actually there's inspiration pretty much everywhere. And the question is, how do we make sure that we capture that?
You know why I asked you that question? There was one more point which you had mentioned, that you're a involuntary activist,
Absolutely, yes.
right?
Yeah.
So where does that take
Yeah, inspiration from me. Yeah, exactly.
origin
Well,
from?
you know what? The reason why, I'll tell you
Yeah.
why. Because honestly, I've joined multiple different activist groups as a voluntary activist, as a kind of very intentional process. And I tell you, there is a common theme across most of them. Lots of people love the community that activism gives you. That's brilliant, right? A lot of people get a lot of enrichment from that. And honestly, because you're almost pre-filtering the rest of the population by the people you've got there, you can develop some of the best friendships in those spaces, right? Because you already know that the people share the same values as you. Brilliant. But at the same time, a lot of activism groups, I'm going to get so much hate for this, by the way, but a lot of activism groups are all about the community and not about the solutions, not about actually delivering the aims of the organization. And I do wonder whether that is partly because they know that they would have to disband if they actually succeeded in their mission. So when I talk about being an involuntary activist, I usually end up joining things when the proverbial has hit the fan and nobody's able to solve anything, right? So, I mean, you'll see this all the time, actually, with occasions, because there's problems even with the existing activist networks. They're struggling to recruit certain demographies of people. They're struggling to keep people in their groups once those other people have become disillusioned. But they don't themselves want to do anything to change that. And it's typical that they lose the very best data people, they lose the very best scientists, they lose the very best facilitators because of the fact that they don't appreciate those people being there. And the most obvious place that you should, or the obvious way you should appreciate what they do, is listen to them and act on those recommendations. Activism doesn't do that, very strangely. They are brilliant for protest, they're brilliant for community, they can support each other really well, as long as that doesn't mean engaging with the existing systems that they have to change. So I have a particular view on XR and Just Stop Oil, and I know that their methods are important to create the dialogue. But what comes after that? And I feel that all the time, as an individual, I find myself becoming that bridge between the activism and what needs to change. For example, the way we do procurement has to change in the UK, and it has to become much more effective. And I know there's a new procurement act, but I don't know many other people that are actually reading the procurement act. That's what I'm doing this afternoon. I'm reading that damn procurement act just to understand what the differences are between the old procurement regulations and this new body of statute. And we need to learn to exploit those to make an effective advocacy and activist network. But unfortunately, very few activist networks are willing to do that level of work. And that is a problem. Because if we don't hold government to account, and I mean that by taking them to court, by shaping the legislation, by shaping the way they buy, all we're doing is allowing them to precipitate the wrong solutions. And worse, you're allowing the climate denialists, the people who don't care about human rights, to influence that body of statute more than you do. Singing and dancing in front of Parliament or in front of the Tory party conference is all very well, but that doesn't drive change at all. And this is what worries me, because too many activists have run down that line. So you can see why I think there's a kind of position where these involuntary activists, the ones who are more silent perhaps than the others, should take a stand. We are able to make those changes without permission, right? So why aren't we? So that's what I see myself doing. I end up dropping into these spaces when all the other kind of things have failed and I have to clean up the mess. I don't want to, but if I don't, somebody else won't. Nobody else will.
Since we're talking about the Procurement Act, what the government is doing, their involvement into different things, let's take this towards the councils.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what are the mistakes that they are doing, and specifically to recycling and waste collection and all of that.
Man, this you asked the question, what mistakes are they doing? The list will be shorter if you were to ask me what are they doing right. That's the problem, right? That is the actual massive issue. Because the reality is councils around the UK are a massive problem. I mean, I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but the reality is that they can't work together because they are only taking responsibility for their geography. In order to get them to work together, they have to set up things like regional mayors, like the GMCA has, right? And that's a problem because, of course, if you can't work together, what they've done is created another layer of bureaucracy just to make them work together, which is obviously a waste of taxpayers' money. So the council do many things wrong. First of all, they don't have a consistency in the colours of bins that they have, right? They don't have consistency in the waste recyclers that they procure, the people they choose. So what you'll get situations where one waste recycler who also owns the material recovery facility in the north of England will capture all the waste from all those other councils, take it to the recovery facility, then take it to their own incineration plant, make money from the electricity, and then give them money from the electricity primarily back to the place which hosts that incineration plant, not the place where the waste was collected from, right? So they'll pay them a nominal amount in rebate, but broadly, the people that get the most out of it are not the same people that provided the waste, right? So what the council are doing by procuring these services is they're forcing money to go out of their region. Another thing they also do wrong is that they misrepresent what recycling is, right? So recycling, as the industry understands it, is take waste, separate it, put it into bales that are of separated stuff, and that's it. That's recycling. That means the waste doesn't go to landfill, and it doesn't get what's called commingled, right? You've been able to separate it. The commingled stuff still gets incinerated anyway. So then you ask the question, what happens to this stuff, right? Does it actually become another product, right? And the answer is mostly no, right? So if that's the case, then what are you really doing, right? All that happens is that you sell it to a manufacturer who can't use it. That manufacturer then gives it back to you. You end up shipping it somewhere else, and you're making money in it's old rope. Basically, you're making money more than once on transferring that waste around. But ultimately, it will end up in landfill or incineration anyway. So all you've done is kick the can down the road and emit more transporting it, right, to places which you can't use it at anyway, right? So that's a mistake. But because councils don't learn about the overall cycle of where that stuff goes, and there's no traceability on some of it as well, they don't choose the best people to do the waste recycling. And another thing they also do is they sign very long contracts. I mean, we've got Sheffield City Council, right? They signed, I believe, a 35-year deal from 2001 to 2036 with their waste recyclers, so they can't really change that contract now, right? So what they're hoping for is that the central government changes the law, and as a result, that forces of change with the contract, because you can't have a civil contract go against what is basically criminal law. So as a result of it, if they can change the statute, that allows them to maybe change the contract. But you can see that puts them on the back foot. It puts them, kind of on the defensive, because now Sheffield cannot become more sustainable because they have to honour the contract they have at the moment. And this is an ongoing issue for many councils who sign very long deals, and the climate cannot wait for that. We can't wait till 2036 until you start changing. Right? I mean, how long is that going to take? Right? So it's a mess. There's also... listen, I could go on about this forever. There's just so much stuff. So the way it's done in the UK is just not coherent. It's not cohesive in the sense, and it also wastes a huge amount of money in the process, which councils really could do a lot more with. And because they don't get the cash back, either in the form of cash, of decent rebate, or in the form of products that they themselves can use, then they're still spending the money that they would spend elsewhere. They're making no savings out of doing this. I mean, a classic example is we turn like plastic trash into like paper clips and all sorts of stationery. And that means that the councils don't have to buy this stuff anymore. They get it for free, right, from the rubbish that they collect. Well, why not, right? I mean, if they're going through tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of stationery that they could substitute from the waste anyway, why aren't they? Why aren't they giving it to schools that could get all this teaching equipment for nothing? It just seems a really, really, really weird way to run a set of organizations, especially given that they don't want to change. So it's an ongoing bugbear of mine, sadly. Well, yeah, councils, what? You know what I mean?
One of your taglines that I read was recycling the plastics that your council won't.
That's right.
Yeah. Can you list a few things? Like when I first read that, I was like, okay, what are those things? Because I've been a very diligent citizen trying to, putting all of the plastics, dividing it by glass and all of that. So as a citizen, I would actually like to know that what are those things?
My guy, you're in for a treat here. So I haven't got a list that could be gone through in an hour, right? This is what I'm saying. It's such a really long list. Because the problem with it is the council can really only recycle a couple of things, right? Anything that's shaped like a bottle, right? That's plastic. That's one thing. So like a plastic bottle for a drink, yes, they can recycle that. A plastic milk bottle, they can recycle that. That's it. Literally, that's it. Every other plastic that you have been putting in your bin has done two things. First of all, it has contaminated not just your bin, but also the back of the entire truck that bin goes into, right? And secondly, you have also, let's say in our case, wasted plastic that could be recycled through other means, like ours. So it's a real problem because people have been really, really diligent in recycling plastic. They've been washing things out, leaving them to dry, putting them in the bins that they think it should go in. But in the reality, none of that is actually happening. So much so that there are certain parts of the UK, naming no names, where they, at a pinch, will get another recycler to come along to collect some of the waste that is too much for the existing recyclers to deal with. And all of that will go into one bin truck. Right, and then be taken away, never to be seen again, right? Because it'll be incinerated, all of it at the same time. So that includes the recycling that you put together. So it's a really, really bad situation because the communication has been poor, right? Now, in our case, we will take all the yogurt pots, which you can't recycle, all the coffee cup lids, which you can't recycle, sandwich boxes, the cardboard ones, which have plastic linings on some of them, we will take that, which they can't recycle. We will take your chairs, we will take your cupboards, we will take your handles, we will take your broken toys, we will take your polystyrene, we will take your wraps. All of those we will take and can recycle and turn into other products. Ideally, working up the waste hierarchy. That means making products which are single-use or even multi-use, but are broken into reusable products, right? That means you don't have to buy those products elsewhere anymore. And you can find them on Amazon if you're up for it. Shameless plug there. But what this means is that we are the wish cycler's dream, as we call it. So all the people that have been told you can recycle this stuff, but you can't recycle this stuff, can actually recycle it via us instead, right? Because we are the ones that can absolutely do that job, definitely. And we'll make it into products nearest to you, right? So it becomes a local economy in its own right. So we're using that as a lever, see what I mean? But this is an ongoing issue with most councils around the UK because some of them will be completely flummoxed or banjaxed by the fact that they've now got tethered lids on the plastic bottles, right? So as a result, those lids are HDPE, right? They're the same stuff your milk bottle is made out of, right? But they can't recycle it in the same process that takes the milk bottle, and it's not the same product, it's not the same material as your bottle itself. So that means you've got a PET bottle with an HDPE lid, but that HDPE lid can't be recycled through the HDPE process that takes the milk bottles. So as a result, what do you do with it? You can't take it off. The whole purpose of the EU doing that was to ensure that it doesn't leave litter and it does get recycled. But the UK doesn't uniformly recycle bottles on or bottles off. So it creates massive problems for some councils around the UK. So you can see that there's an ongoing issue by the confusion that the councils cause themselves and indeed the way statute interacts with it. But again, this doesn't matter to all of us. This is all like, well, whatever. We'll recycle everything anyway, so.
Yeah, and I would just go like, why? Like, why? I mean, that's the one word that I have, like, why?
Yeah, exactly. And what's worse is the councils, I think, also partly delude themselves. If you look at all the council executive meetings, you can go online and find them from your local council, and you just find the ones related to waste. Every one of them will say, we have recycled 98% of our waste. No, you haven't. Because the reason why is because you know that incineration I talked about? It gets rebranded as thermal recycling. Can you believe it? Thermal recycling! What on earth is that? Right, but what that basically means, they burn it, and yeah, we recycle the energy that went into making it in the first place. No, that's not recycling, is it? Right? That is burning it for energy, and you're emitting stuff while you do that. So, and you're losing that material. So it's not good resource management, but it's a way to appease the political classes, if you like, by just calling it recycling when it's not. It's zero waste to landfill, sure, but you burnt it instead, or you exported it elsewhere to other parts of the world that can't process it. So, it's what worries me is a lot of it is bordering on fraud, really. But that's where we are. That's how it's evolved over the years.
So we've discussed about the councils, the government, the thing that you are doing.
Yeah.
Do you have any other players in the market who you'd just like to give a shout out to, like somebody who's doing well in this space?
I'll give a shout out to two more organizations in particular. So one of them is Precious Plastic. They do something very similar to us, but they do it using higher energy machines and they don't do 3D printing with it. they set up a lot of open source infrastructure you can get hold of if you can build it yourself. You can buy them in their bazaar as well, but generally it's quite expensive. So I want to give a shout out to them because globally they're doing some really good work, especially trying to rebalance some of the inequity around plastics in the developing world, in the global south. So that's one group. Another one I want to give a shout out to is Brothers Make. Now, they're an interesting pair because they're a pair of brothers, funny enough, and they capture typically milk bottle tops, but also some other types of plastic, and they will make end products out of, recycled products out of that they sell online. Both of those have YouTube channels that you can go and give a shout out to because or take a look at, because they even kind of work in the open, if you like. So they develop in the open, and that's always really, really good. They're not in the space that we're in, because we're in a kind of similar purpose, but what we do is very different, because we're trying to replace especially some of the lower run manufacturing process, which is usually quite expensive when you try to do it as an individual entrepreneur. And we are the people that close that gap, but we do so in a sustainable way. So whilst we do play in a similar space, that's only because we're doing the entirety of the system ourselves. They have particular smaller scale versions of what it is we do, but it also doesn't work in a kind of collective way like our system does. But I want to give those two a shout out anyway, because of the fact that they are, I think, changing the conversation and showing what can be done in a very educational, inspirational way.
We were discussing around, how the stuff that council won't, but you at Automedi would recycle those things. Yeah. If just in 3 clear ways you could tell, for example, if a global corporate is watching this, what are the 3 ways that they can basically work with you?
Oh, it's that easy. The first, global corporates in particular are in a really good position to recycle a lot of stuff. So the way we always recommend engaging us is, first of all, get in touch. Get to our website, fill in the contact form, or just contact us at hello@reallyrecycle.com. What we'll then do is get in touch with you, and the process usually follows 3 key steps. The first one is we'll do a waste characterization exercise, not just to understand what your waste is, but also how much value you could actually get from it as product, not as a rebate. Right? And usually people are gobsmacked to find out how much money they can make from their waste. The second step, of course, is to then install one of our facilities on site. That would then give them 3 vending machines by default and the recycle hub. They can obviously get more of them if they wanted to. And what they will then also do is to choose a set of products that they want to start with. But what we always encourage them to do is to ask their employees what else they will need. And you will get some really weird requests. And that's okay, because of the way 3D printing works, you can make anything. You can even fold bigger things into the volume of the 3D print build space. So that means that the kind of the limitations that would normally exist for manufacturing don't exist with us. So when we say ask them what they want, I mean ask them what they want. We'll often go around with the machines and show people how it works, and they go, "Can I make a thing?" We'll go, "Yes." They go, "Oh my god, I've always wanted one of these," and this is exactly what we want. That's what we actually want from all of them. We'll obviously then go on site, and then we will help them keep refining the offer so that they can start looking at ways of substituting their existing commodity products, and low-risk products especially, with the functional stuff that's made through our system. So that's one key way. We will work with people on a consultancy basis, and we will work with people on a product purchase basis, i.e. you will buy the end products of our other operations, which is also another way forward. And that's usually the simplest way. Go onto our Amazon store or our website and buy a wholesale unit or whatever it is that you need. So those are the 3 main ways that we see it.
Fantastic. Assuming I'm a 25, 27-year-old budding entrepreneur who's very passionate about, environment and sustainability. I might not have the domain expertise in the field yet, but I'm actually looking to make a business in this. Yeah, with the right intentions, of course. Yeah. What is, in your opinion, maybe something that is going to boom in the future, or something that you see a scope a budding entrepreneur can go into? And especially, if you could just give a clear action plan as well. maybe not a lot of steps, but I mean, I understand you can't give a full business plan to me in
No, of course not. No, not at all. Yeah, exactly.
the next few minutes.
So you're looking for a new
yeah.
job. Yeah, exactly. Well, no, the reality is that this area, whether we like it or not, has to happen. I would also say, don't be afraid of not focusing on the communication for a while. Right? The reason why is because a lot of people communicate about sustainability, but that stuff actually isn't the thing that moves the needle. Actually doing the thing moves the needle. So if I was to give you kind of like a view as to what I think the future will look like, and then we talk about the solutions around that, that might be sort of productive. So the first thing I see is a lot more use of solar and hybrid technology in that space. So that, and I mean that in the context of wind and solar. But the reason why that's important is because that now opens the door to communities around the world who can't currently have factories, right? And there's a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, that wants to have a factory in every town. They even have a policy. A lot of people have been elected on that principle. But the reality is that in order to put a factory somewhere, a conventional factory, you have to have two other things. You have to have roads in and out of that factory, and you have to have energy in and out of that factory. Neither of those two will run themselves through the process of creating a high energy facility, energy generation facility, or roads if they can't see something going in or out, right? Because they won't build the roads until they see the factory. The factory won't be able to exist until they have the energy. The energy won't install until they see the factory. So the whole thing becomes a cyclical problem. That is intractable. That is the thing that holds back a lot of those economies from becoming like Western economies or more advanced in a lot of cases. Never mind all the geopolitical forces that also keep them there. So one thing that we see is that a lot of those communities are now starting to understand the value of decentralization at smaller scale stuff. So using methods like ours, implanting micro facilities in those spaces that are powered entirely through solar panels suddenly opens up the door for them to demonstrate that they now do deserve roads and high energy facilities and a factory because they've proven it at a smaller scale. It gives that bridge. But it also provides supplies for those parts of the world that are basically stuck without them. I mean, taking healthcare, 51% of the world's population have no access to basic healthcare products, basic ones, right? So that's a huge untapped market, effectively, of 4 billion people that we have screwed over in the West because we have not treated them with equity, right? The whole ecosystem of circular, helical, sustainable economies, including the second-degree entrepreneurial benefits of it, will be worth $36 trillion, right? More than 1.5 times the value of US GDP in a year, right? It's not a small thing. So the opportunities there can be get deep into the hard tech aspects of it, forget about the hard tech aspects of it, and just become an entrepreneur for any form of product that you want to create, and use platforms like ReallyRecycle to do it. So we become your factory. You just white label those goods that you want anyway and sell them. But also, you immediately get access to a freightless supply chain, which is what we are. So I could make a product here in Manchester, as we film this today, and it be available in Peterborough the same day. Not just Peterborough, but Arizona, Taiwan, and other developed or even developing nations, right? That means you can go from idea to product globally available in one single day, right? That is a massive departure from where industry is at the moment, right? So the future is around localized circular economy, localized remanufacture. And as long as the entrepreneurs who want to enter this space have an understanding of that, they automatically understand how to make it effective for their own communities to benefit not just their profit margin, but also the people around them and the planet as a whole. You see what I mean? So as a result of that, the focus I would say is get up to speed on sustainability, get up to speed on understanding what decentralization can give you from a resilience and climate benefit, and also think about the link points into the existing economy, right? So, for example, wholesale markets, direct to consumer, businesses that need waste collection, all of those are link points into that circular economy that you will create, because circular economies have the benefit that you as an entrepreneur can create value anywhere in that circle, right? And it's just a matter of choosing how you wish to rotate it.
Fantastic. There's one thing that I see around myself and my peers, and that is what I feel as well, that our generation is more climate conscious, what we are purchasing, not just from the climate perspective, but just socially, environmental, like all of that.
Right.
I'm assuming at that time around you, not a lot of people would be scared as how we are.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So why were you then?
It's a damn good question. And the short answer, I don't actually know. I couldn't tell you why I was scared about it. It was just important for me for some unknown reason. But then, so were a lot of other things. So a lot of social equity problems were important for me. I remember being a child and watching this thing called Telethon, which is a 24-hour TV show, right, that they would do for charity every year. I used to cry when it ended, right? As a 10-year-old, right? Because it was such an important thing. I used to kind of be very, very into kind of social causes, and it, in a way, still am. But I couldn't actually tell you. It just felt like there was I don't know whether it's an empathy thing or what. You know, people accuse me of lacking empathy, but actually, people who know me really, really well understand what my dynamic is and why I do that. But it's a really good question. I couldn't name it, but at the time, it just felt like pain, right? That seeing another child, another person suffer unnecessarily for something they didn't do, and that extended to the climate. Obviously, as a child who comes from an Arabic background, an Iraqi one specifically, we were very aware of things like Saddam Hussein's rule and what he used to do to some of his own citizens. And that stuck with me as well. So it's a really weird mishmash of experiences of kind of disadvantage or persecution. And as I got to be kind of 9 years old and understand that the planet is in a way a kind of living system, we can persecute it as humans, right? So if we can persecute the planet like we can persecute humans, then why is that fair? So I think maybe that's where some of that kind of ethos came from. But what surprised me was, as you say, even in the eco space, people didn't understand that. They didn't understand that at all. Right? And even by that point, scientists like James Lovelock had come up with the Gaia hypothesis, and that was proven. And all of this stuff was kind of demonstrating that the Earth is an ecosystem. It's as alive as we are. Animals are sentient. But despite that, even the activist space kept getting it wrong as I saw it. So I couldn't tell you. Because as you say, my friends didn't care. My parents didn't care. The family didn't care. They would do it because I would shout about something and they'll just do it to shut me up. But really, I couldn't pin exactly what it was that kept me going in that time. But I think it was that kind of that pain of seeing another pain, if you like. That's probably what it was.
How we say sometimes that ignorance is bliss,
Yeah.
right? And you being in this space, you're not really ignoring any of this, right? So
Not at all.
how is that? I mean, does it get scary for you? Does it
Scary.
does it take you there?
Yeah, scary is an interesting word. I mean, I made peace with the fact that, listen, as you get older, you make peace with the fact that you're going to die one day, right? My knees keep reminding me that one every single week, right? But, so for me, I know that everyone's got limited time, regardless. So in terms of scared, that's an interesting way of presenting it. For me, the fear is not so much on a personal level. It's the fact that in my mind, I'm seeing yet another slow motion car crash happening, where society is not going to move fast enough. The activists are going to concentrate on the wrong stuff. Nobody's going to be focusing on the right stuff. And in the end, we will sleepwalk into an absolute calamity in some form, whether that is another world war, genocide of people, which is already happening, whether it is the climate catastrophe taking out and wiping out potentially anywhere up to 3 billion people, or a mixture of all of them. That's the calamity. That's where we have failed to solve the problem, right? And I don't like slow motion car crashes because you live with that vision for quite some time until the crash happens. And even sometime afterwards. And that's, it would be nice to be able to just kind of settle down, forget about this, go kind of swimming every other day or skiing every other month. That would be amazing, but that's just not seemingly how I've evolved my life. So I don't know what that would call it scared. It's just somewhat cynical, dare I say. Because the issue is that I've seen this happen before. And we are usually very bad at stopping ourselves from allowing it to happen as a human race. So there is this question as to whether I sit down and try to convince a person in front of me that climate change needs to be solved, or I get my boots on, roll up my sleeves, and fix it myself. That's the way I've gone with it.
You chose the latter.
I chose the latter. What a mistake that's going to turn out to be, but let's see.
I mean, I'm glad we have enough people like you and so many more, I mean, who are working on this.
Yeah.
But that was actually my last question.
Sure,
Is there any other last thoughts that you would want to leave us with?
Yeah.
For this time, I can see that there's so much that we can keep on.
You can see from my face, I have lots of thoughts. You've probably seen if anybody follows my LinkedIn or anything like that, I've got lots of thoughts. You're welcome to them. Right? The thoughts are free. But I think for me, no, the reality is that we are going to be facing some of the most difficult decades that I think humanity has ever faced. Right? Even at a time where people talk about World War II being one of the most difficult times, it was, but you didn't have climate change then. Right? We are now in a situation where we have screwed up so many parts of civilization that even the break it up and rebuild it better idea may not last because there might not be anything to build back with. So when I say that people need to get serious, I mean dancing is very nice. I mean speeches are amazing. But what comes after? How do you actually action the change? And I don't mean action by creating a cardboard plaque and just running around with it. That's fine. Use that for the protest. But then after that, what happens next? What are the people going to be doing to actively force that change? And honestly, you don't need government to do it. You never need government to do it. If the problem with it is we rely on government to do it because we are conditioned to rely on government to do waste collection or recycling. But in reality, you don't need any of that. Actually, you can set the systems up yourself. So do it. I think that's it.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you so much,
It's a
Ethar,
pleasure.
for today. And I mean, I had a great time. I learned so much.
No worries.
And I'm sure everybody who listened to this will learn how I learned this during this time right now.
Totally.
So, yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.
And so glad to have you today.
No, pleasure, man. And obviously, if anybody doesn't like what they've heard, you know where to find me. Cheers, boss. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.